Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Driving Sales with Same-Day Delivery. My name is Amanda Armendariz, and I am the editor of PARCEL Media. Before I go ahead and introduce our speaker today, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation by using the Q&A tab, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar today. Secondly, if you have a technical question, something's not loading, something's not working, you can submit a question in that same spot, and a member of our staff will be able to assist you with that. And finally, I want to remind you that this webinar is archived for a full year, so you can revisit it at any time, forward it to a colleague. You just need to use the same link that you used to listen to us today. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker. Justin Cramer is the Global Product Management Director and the co-founder of ProShip. And by the way, ProShip is our sponsor today, so we want to give them a huge thank you as well for making this complimentary to our audience. During his time at ProShip, he has deployed, designed, and consulted on over 300 customer solutions across 4 continents, and some of those were on a very, very large scale. So he definitely has a wealth of information that I know that he will be sharing with us today. So with that, I will hand it off to Justin.
Thank you, Amanda. So I've got a lot to talk about today. There's so much going on with this topic in the industry, and we're still in the early stages of where the industry is with same-day delivery. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what we know right now, what limitations that we know about, some of the steps that you might be looking at, as well as some of the leaders in the industry that have gone the farthest, who they are and where they are within their phases. Again, I'd like to encourage any questions to be posted. We will try to get to those at the end. And without further ado, let's move forward. So the state of the market itself, well, really, it's in a state of rapid change. Like I said, we're very early in the process here, but we're seeing so much going on. We're going to talk about why this change matters, how it matters to you, some common myths around that, and of course, we're going to look at the carrier landscape, which is kind of broken down into 3 areas already. The enterprise players for carriers, the crowdsourced carriers, and the fragmented incumbents. First, let's look at why. Why does this matter right now? And as we look through each of these statistics, number one, we notice already more than 50% of all e-commerce brands offer some type of same-day delivery. So if you're not offering it, it might be a differentiator in a negative sense for your customers. We see that the carriers themselves are expecting a huge amount of revenue to start coming from these same-day deliveries as well. And of course, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the customer expectations and some of the customers' willingness to actually pay more for a same-day service. But first, let's look at some of the myths. And one of the biggest ones that I see in the industry is that same-day delivery is a new concept, when in reality, we see cities like LA, New York, DC, Chicago, all these big cities. They've actually been working on. They've actually been experiencing same-day deliveries for years. Okay, often in grocery, but in other methods as well. Right. So what is actually new is how enterprise, crowdsourced, and incumbent carriers are being used to actually execute this beyond those mega cities, where the inhabitants are just used to having options for just about everything. Right? And of course, our customers' expectations have changed dramatically over time, where now we are starting to see in the near suburbs, in the next 100 biggest cities, we're starting to see that expectation that those customers are going to want that same-day delivery option at least. And then the other big myth that we're still fighting against is that a single carrier can supply all of a carrier's same-day delivery needs. And the reality is that we see so much differentiation in the coverage. Nobody covers everything coast to coast. There is no 100% coverage at all. And most importantly, I'll talk a little bit about this today, is there's a lot of volatility right now amongst the current offerings. And I'll talk about who's come into the market, left the market from a carrier standpoint, because it is something that as you plan for implementation, as you plan for target markets, it's something you need to ensure that you've got backup as everything goes along. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start with our first poll. Okay, so what we're looking at is we're trying to understand with our audience, where are you within your same-day delivery strategy? Many companies have started implementation processes, whether that's just proof of concepts. Others are still in a planning phase, and many others may not be planning at all. They may be like, you know what, we're going to wait it out, and we're going to see exactly where everybody else goes. We're going to look at the Amazons, the Targets, the Walmarts, and see how everything is going forward here. All right, I'm going to give this about 30 seconds of silence to get a little drink here while I'm at it, and let everybody finish filling in the poll as they want to. All right, I think we've got about all the results we're going to get now, and let's go ahead and review them. All right, and it looks like we do have some early adopters, about 17% are early adopters. Nearly 50% of you guys are in the planning stage, and 35% of you guys are all saying, you know what, we're going to wait it out and give everybody else a chance to see exactly what we're looking at. All right, let's go ahead and let's jump back into the slides then. That gives me a feel as to what you guys are looking at. And again, I want to start with the carriers themselves, because there's so much going on with the carriers. When we first look at the basics, as we were putting this together, things were changing. Just in the week and a half that we were putting this presentation together, we thought we had 3 enterprise carriers, but it turns out that already one has pulled out. We don't know if it's permanently or temporarily, but as you can see, there's a change there. Many of you may be aware of the U.S. Postal Service's Metro Post offering. Now, it used to be that was a standalone service. As of 2016, that's actually been pulled in-house even deeper, and you have to have an NSA or a National Service Agreement in order to access it. Okay. Probably one of the biggest ones out there is Deliv. They'll move anything within a certain size. And of course, we've got a lot of different ones out there that are currently specialized in grocery. But by putting the information together, they may be able to do electronics, soft goods, things of that nature as well. And we can't discount the fact that same-day delivery has been out there for years, but it's usually been the wheelhouse of traditional couriers. Okay, and of course, I don't think that all of them are just going to go away and stop working overnight, so we have to take those into account as well. As I mentioned, there's a lot of volatility in this market. Others have been in the market and either pulled out of the market, and in the case of United States Post Office, made it more difficult to actually leverage them within the market. So Uber went in there, they've backed out. DHL was in there. They were relatively early in the enterprise market. Right now, from what we know, they're not offering that anymore. We don't know if that's temporary or permanent. And of course, the United States Post Office moving the Metro Post capability behind a national service agreement makes that a lot more difficult to get to. But we still do have the enterprise carriers, and there's a lot of advantages to those. All right. One of the disadvantages is their city coverage is pretty narrow. All right. But they've got great enterprise level documentation. They've got personnel who know how to implement this, so they can help you, or you can use third parties like us to go ahead and help you do that as well. But they give great communication such that can be done. All right. United States Post Office has been doing this in a smaller fashion for years now, so it's got great predictability. With FedEx, this is relatively new to them, so it's very early. It's almost too early to tell. And there is still the risk that, like DHL, they may put a temporary or a permanent hold on this. Now, it's my personal opinion that all of the major carriers are going to get into this at some point, whether that's via acquisition or via internal growth. Okay, we've got our crowdsourced carriers, and here's where we start to see a lot more of that volatility. Right, your coverage varies a lot. We'll show you some coverage maps a little bit later in this presentation. But one of the great advantages that they have is because most of the crowdsourced solutions out there are very new. They're built on modern technologies, and most of those modern technologies create for very clean JSON-based documentation strategies that are very easy for whether it's your internal IT group or your multi-carrier shipping software to quickly and easily connect to in order to provide that functionality within your enterprise software stack. Okay? Now, they may have great documentation, but as many of them are startups, they might be a little cash strapped, they might be a little personnel strapped. Their integration support may vary. Therefore, it's always easier to go with a partner to get through all that. Reliability, well, that's still out to market right now. I'm not seeing a whole lot of feedback in the industry yet as to whether Deliv, Postmates, so on and so forth, how they're doing from a shipper satisfaction metric. But that's something that we're keeping our eye on because we really do want to see if there is going to be a standout in the industry that, of course, we're all going to want to keep in our back pocket to help us implement our strategy, or at least to have as a backup maybe to the enterprise incumbents. Okay. And of course, we do have the existing couriers right now, whether they be bike messengers within large cities, all the various small, regionally run, sometimes just city run, the traditional couriers that go from point A to point B. So they're, of course, going to be very interesting. And it's going to be, what we've seen so far is they're very fragmented. There's only a couple of cities that have couriers that are large enough to be integrated into, meaning that it's something that you could advertise from your shopping cart and something you could execute, whether that's from a store, from a warehouse, or from a 3PL or one of your manufacturers. So it's really quite interesting right now with the carriers, and I think that's where the greatest level of volatility comes in, because as we saw in some of the initial statistics, the customers are looking for it. The market is expecting it. But what we seem to have a problem with right now is finding a way to actually implement this, not just from within our own enterprise software stacks, but finding carriers that can meet or exceed our customers' expectations in a way that can be integrated to our enterprise software stacks. So this is why whomever you're using, whether you're direct to the carriers, whether you're using a third party like ProShip or someone else, having those relationships with the carriers, understanding what they're putting out, getting information about as areas are being brought up, shut down, so on and so forth, is really important. And we expect that this is going to be, and not exactly a gold rush, because let's face it, there's only a certain number of customers that are going to leverage this, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But this is definitely something where not having this, not being seen as presenting the options to your customers, is going to look poorly in a lot of your customers' mind, especially in the millennial and the Gen Zs who are just now starting to get into that buying power. But enough about that. Let's move forward just a little bit here, and let's actually talk about the coverage areas that we see. Now, there's a lot of different ones here, and we kind of have them set up largest to smallest. Okay, but the first one here, not even going to show it here. Here's the United States Post Office. They do not advertise what this is, and that coverage area might actually be negotiated on a customer-by-customer basis. So with the United States Post Office, remember that you won't know until you qualify for a national service agreement. Deliv, okay, remember one of the nice things about Deliv is they'll pick up just about anything and deliver it within those areas. Okay, so they have a decent coverage area. FedEx, probably the major incumbent that we can look at right now, the major big carrier. Their data is posted by zip code. And as you can see, there's a couple of major city corridors that they're delivering at right now. Assuming this goes well for them, we do expect to see this expand over time until more and more of the major cities in North America will be covered. One of the things I should probably point out here is that it's not expected that a same day let me say this a different way. It is expected that all same-day shipments will be courier-based, meaning from point A to point B, no hub in the center, which is one of the things that actually limits the distance that it can go. Now, I've heard some rumors about some doing collection hubs at the edges of some of the larger cities in order to extend a second leg out and get a little further. Okay, but we still haven't seen that in the market yet. So far, it's all been either a real-time milk run, or it has been a point-to-point delivery. So keep that in mind going forward. That's one of those little carrier network pieces that is very different from your from your next day, your expresses, and your ground delivery services, is that all of those generally go from one hub to another and then go onto a delivery trailer in order to go to the customer. Moving on here, we get now into some of the more specialized ones. Okay, Shipt, they were purchased by Target a couple of years ago, and though they're still supposedly doing offering services to other retailers, businesses, manufacturers, so on and so forth, it is very clear that Target is heavily leveraging them throughout the country. And you'll notice that this coverage map here is significantly larger than both FedEx Same Day as well as Delivs. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with this is how Target is driving their same day solution out to all of their customers. Okay. Much like Amazon, many retailers may not want to leverage this because this is a wholly owned subsidiary of Target, from what I understand, and therefore some people may want to stay away from it. Postmates, on the other hand, very strict in what they can deliver, but you see their coverage is even larger. There's a lot more filled in. Almost the entire Midwest has some options everywhere. As you move to the Northwest, you see it kind of clears out there a little bit, but that's kind of expected given the population. But you'll also notice that though Shipt added Hawaii, Postmates here not only has Hawaii, but Alaska deliveries as well. And then finally, the grocery, we almost can call them a grocery incumbent now because they're so pervasive. But Instacart, which specializes in groceries, probably has the largest coverage area of anyone. But it is that specialization that might make it difficult for most of the listeners on this call to actually leverage them. It will be interesting to see if Instacart branches out from there and also includes a point-to-point parcel delivery solution, which could put them in a very interesting position going forward, especially given how much larger their coverage area is than anybody else's. I'm going to point out one other time, just because there's a pin on here does not mean that we can go from one pin to another. The pin represents generally a zip code area, and each zip code area that the carrier advertises has been depicted by an individual pin. There is no solution right now that goes from one pinned point to another pinned point. All right. So let's keep moving on here, and let's talk about some of the limitations and restrictions of developing same-day options. Right. So as we see it, there's 6 areas you want to look at: technology, labor, space, inventory, carriers, and your customers themselves. Starting with technology, right? We really have to make sure that your entire enterprise software stack is capable of communication everywhere, right? So that means that and I'm going to jump ahead real quick here, talk a little bit about inventory, but note that in the market right now, we're seeing 4 distinct inventory sources: your DCs, your stores, if you have any, your 3PLs, and manufacturers, if you've got direct relationships with them. So by understanding you have those 4 inventory sources, your technology stack has to be able to communicate that, right? So you have to be able to tell somebody within a store, hey, I need you to pick these items. They need to be picked within the next hour such that they're available for pickup, and I need a response back. You also need the shipping software that you're using to extend to those stores, okay? And of course, you're going to need a huge amount of data and analytics in order to know what to stock in those stores in order to best serve that local constituent. Okay? And of course, we want to do that from a same-day delivery standpoint, but we don't want to ruin the in-store customer experience. So we're going to have to find a balance, which brings us to labor. especially right now since everybody is at the same time as same day is rolling across the country. We are seeing that ship from store, it's a little further advanced. It's a little more along the maturity curve, okay? But there are still a lot of concerns, and there are still a lot of companies out there that are looking how to do that. And what we found is there's a lot of training, there's a lot of accountability, there's incentivization, and basically it's about determining, do you time split employees within a given store? Do you have dedicated employees? This is a little bit easier for department stores than it would be for a boutique. But all of these things have to be taken into account, especially with the within a store, but also within your DCs and potentially within your external inventory sources. Okay, maybe in your DCs you're going to have a set of teams that their sole job is to be on the hot items. They may be pulling express orders until a same-day order comes in, and then they divert to those same-day orders. We're starting to see a lot of creativity going in here, and with some of the different picking options that some of the WMSs are now coming out with, it becomes a lot easier to interrupt a queue, interrupt a pick, and divert a picker to actually get them to pull the appropriate items so they can leave the warehouse at that appropriate time. Okay. Space becomes an issue, especially in stores, especially the smaller that store gets. There needs to be a spot, usually for a scanner, a scale, and the appropriate printers, usually a thermal barcode printer and a regular sheet bed printer, to produce all the documents that a carrier might want. Now, mind you, this is already covered if you're doing ship from store, but if you're not, and if this ends up going hand in hand with your ship from store deployment, this becomes a real issue that many of our customers have had to deal with. Now, inventory, I know I covered one of the 3 bullet points here already, but accuracy and quality is really important. This is kind of alludes back to that technology stack. We have to know, that the enterprise software stack has to have great confidence in the amount of stock that's available at that location. Your order management system, your OMS, has to be able to look at, if you have 4,000 stores, maybe you're a very large enterprise shipper here. If you have 4,000 stores, maybe you have 3 stores within the delivery area here. Being able to balance workload, the inventory that's at that, all of that is very important, that data be flowing back and forth between your enterprise software stack. And of course, quality of that data is paramount. If we can't trust the data, we're gonna miss delivery times for the customer, and that's gonna be very disappointing, and that's gonna hurt reputations. Okay, carriers, I basically spent the first 15 minutes of the conversation talking about them, the coverage concerns, the volatility that we're seeing. And of course, we cannot dismiss the fact that same-day deliveries are going to be at the top of the cost scale, even more costly than an express service. So somehow that's got to be taken into account as well. And then finally, customer awareness is something that we really want to ensure that we find ways to get out there. It doesn't do you much good to have gone through all the effort to get your technology in order, figure out how to do the labor component, fit the space within the stores and maybe special lanes in a warehouse, have all your inventory sources with great quality and accuracy and all that, have the carriers lined up, and not let anybody know about it. Now, that might be great for a pilot in a couple of different areas, but of course, even pilots have large upfront costs. So just to summarize all of it, let you see all those on one single screen. I'm going to pause for just a second here, catch a little drink, and let you guys look at all of this as one big picture. Again, we're getting some questions already here. Now is a great time to, during this 60-second pause to go ahead and fill in any questions you may have. All right, moving on. All right, so steps to delivering a same-day strategy, right? We've broken this down into 4 steps that we've seen with our customers: evaluating options, Internal data communication, again, we're going back to that enterprise software stack. Customer interaction, we really want to set that customer expectation, and then we want to execute to that customer expectation, right? So as we look at this, when we evaluate our options, this has kind of been broken down into 3 areas that we see repetitively. What services are you going to offer? How are you going to charge your customers for those costs? Okay. And again, we go back to those inventory locations. Now, I'm going to just pause here for a second and make sure I spell out why inventory locations are so important. The idea here is that even if you're looking to execute same day within a major metropolitan area, due to the limited delivery areas of even multiple different shippers or different carriers, you may need to actually combine multiple carriers within the same metropolitan area to have full coverage to both the suburbs and the inner city. Okay, so it's one of the reasons why these inventory locations keep popping up over and over again, because the more inventory sources you have, the more likely you are to have an inventory source in a region that will deliver to more customers. So that's why I keep coming back to that one over and over and over again. All right, internal data communication. Again, I'm going back to that enterprise software stack, but in a little bit more detail. Now, you may not have all these parts, but the functions of these parts are probably being handled by something within your enterprise software stack. Okay, first, it's what faces the customer, that e-commerce suite, right? Larger customers are going to have an ERP to handle all the data moving back and forth. We're seeing more and more order management systems actually interfacing to the e-commerce suite and eventually communicating to the ERP system. Those order management systems are communicating to the warehouse management systems to get that inventory. They're communicating via EDI if you're going to be using a 3PL or manufacturer to execute, whether it's an expedited, a ground, or in this case, a same-day solution. And of course, if we are talking about store locations, whether they're large department stores or small boutiques, we're going to make sure that we want to communicate to the point of sale appropriately. And of course, what I'm here to talk about in the end is that multi-carrier shipping software, ensuring that you have software that's able to communicate all of that same-day origin capability, destination capability, and costing information, along with things such as the cutoff times to the rest of that enterprise software stack, which could change on an origin by origin basis. So when you find out where that customer is, well, if they're, let's say, in Chicago, great, we know we can go until, let's say, 3 p.m. Central, okay? On the other hand, if I'm in Austin, Texas, maybe due to traffic, due to something of that nature, you can only go until 2 p.m. Central. So these are very important pieces of information, often that the multi-carrier shipping system will have, that needs to be communicated to the e-commerce suite and the OMS to make those differentiations and to make those decisions. The OMS is going to communicate to the EDI. The WMS may need to gather the information from the WMS and the point of sale may need to gather information from that multi-carrier shipping software to actually execute those shipments. Okay. Now, of course, as ground shipping usually had less rules than express shipping, we're expecting to see an increase in the rules that a company is going to put in place for same-day shipping will grow as almost as much as they did for express. So you really want to make sure that when you're looking at this internal data communication, whether it's in any of these pieces of software, and preferably you want to put the business rule in the right piece of software, but in our case, we really want to talk about that multi-carrier shipping software. Make sure that all those business rules are in place. And we're not just talking about the carrier's business rules, but we're also talking about your business rules. Business rules that may be based upon the loyalty level of the customer, the average spend of the customer, things of that nature. You may need to ensure that those business rules are handled in the right spot of the enterprise software stack, so that you can determine: am I going to sell this to the customer at full price, the shipping cost that is, or am I going to give them a discount and count that as marketing dollars? Customer interaction. After we've done all this work, and I can tell you, having gone through several of these, that internal data communication piece, especially for large customers, can be a multi-year project, okay, with a lot of effort and whole company focus on it to make that happen. And after you've done all this work, you really want to make sure that you're going to get the greatest bang for all that effort. And of course, that brings us to marketing, advertising, and looking at things like even if you just offer same-day shipping, even if it's priced out, right? The fact that nearly 50% of shoppers are more willing to shop as you as a vendor because they know they have that safety net. If they need it today, regardless of what you're shipping, if they need it today, maybe they forgot a birthday, an anniversary, something like that, that's really something that gives them peace of mind, even if they never use it, okay? And a great number of customers online, especially in that millennial age, they are already ready to pay more for that, okay? So if you offer it, there's a good chance people will be using it, okay? So, if you don't offer it, well, there's about half the customers that will be less likely to shop on your site. Okay? And of course, now once we've got all this in place, we've got our customers leveraging this, we need to make sure that we take into account how we're going to execute that customer expectation, right? We need to understand what our fulfill times are. And that fulfill time, especially if we're talking about stores, may change significantly. Fulfill time in warehouses does change, especially if you're a very peak season heavy shipper. You need to understand your fulfill times, and that data needs to be fed into that internal data communication that we talked about in part 2. Okay, and then finally, this is not something we're seeing yet, but it's something that we always want to look at. If we have two shippers that cover the same origin destination pair, that means we can rate shop against them. And if we can consider one to be an upgrade or a downgrade, customers nowadays aren't really caring. They really want to make sure that they get that product on time, and they don't care if it's a brown truck, a white truck, if it's got an A on the side of it, or something else. All they care is that their expectation was met by a delivery that you commissioned. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about who's early in the game and how they're doing. Now, of course, we know about number one, Amazon. They're the trendsetter. They announced $800 million in spending to move up what was a 2-day commitment time now to a 1-day commitment time. And in many areas, it's a same day, depending upon what time you order and what metropolitan area you're in. Now, it's still usually an upcharge for that same day, but I'm seeing it on so many of my own Amazon purchases. It's something that I'm hearing about from my colleagues. Amazon, let's face it, they are the trendsetter in the market right now. We've got a lot of early adopters out there, many of them in retail. Okay, again, I want to point you back to Shipt being owned by Target, and Target taking a good lead in the same-day delivery contest right now. Okay, and then we have some explorers out there. And grocery and pharmacy are all in various stages of pilots, small market testing, carrier testing, things of that nature. We're hearing a lot about that. If you're watching if you're watching the grocery and pharmacy markets in LinkedIn, you're always hearing about the use of robots, the use of various services out there. We may even, for pharmacy, we may even see some specialized services where drivers have to be certified for the crowdsourced solutions out there. All of these things are very volatile right now. It's just kind of the key word for this solution right now, but it is what we're seeing. And of course, we're seeing that great giant out there, Walmart, emerging, right? They may not get all the headlines, but we know they're doing it. We've already heard their response to Amazon. If you're on the West Coast, you're probably getting next day shipping for free. Walmart has gone through various strategies about same-day deliveries, including using their own employees on their drive home. They're not sitting on their laurels. They're going to be coming into this pretty hard and pretty fast. Okay. All right, so we've covered a lot of different things now. I do want to take just one slide here Before we get into questions, it looks like we've got quite a number of questions, so I'm gonna drive through this slide pretty quickly here, so we've got time for those questions. So, of course, this webinar today is brought to you by ProShip with our multi-carrier shipping software. We deal with a lot of very large retailers. We write our own engine technology, so we're not leveraged solely off of APIs, which gives us flexibility, customization, and an always available architecture. If you've got any questions, if you want to know more about ProShip, find us at proshipinc.com, and we should see that nicely on this slide as well. And yeah, so this should give me a good 20 minutes here to answer questions. Amanda, let's go ahead and hit those questions.
All right. Sounds good. Yes, we do have some great questions here, so let's just jump right in. The first one we have is, can shipping software like ProShip be utilized in stores as well as distribution centers?
Definitely. The idea is that all 4 inventory sources can either use software like ProShip or use the results of software like ProShip. And what I mean by the results is if we are looking at a 3PL, you're generally EDIing orders to that 3PL. So ProShip can be used given an expected fulfill time or SLA from your 3PLs and your manufacturers to say, okay, we expect from the time we give you this order, it will be fulfilled and on a carrier trailer in, let's say, 4 hours. That's all the same information we would need to know in a store or we would need to know in a warehouse. Therefore, for all 4 inventory sources, we can either provide documents, execute the complete shipment, or we can go ahead and advise how it should be shipped.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. The next question is, you explained the different same-day carriers in good detail, but how do you know which same-day carriers to move forward with?
Oh, this is a great question. And the reality is that I don't think you can move forward with just one. You have to look at all of them. You have to look at, and I'm going to tell you, your first cut is going to be, do they actually service my origins? If a given carrier does not service the origins you have, well, they don't make the list, and that's going to be the biggest cut right there. If you've got a lot of stores, though, if you've got a lot of warehouses, if you've got a lot of partners that can ship on your behalf, really, this is the point in time where, as I mentioned, there's, especially with the crowdsourced ones, there's some volatility, there's some support concerns, okay? I'll say they're just concerns. They haven't been, I don't know of any major problems in the market yet with the crowdsourced ones, but they don't have the backing of the multi-decade companies like FedEx and the United States Post Office. So your second step after you go past the location filter is to make sure you can work with that carrier. Okay, can you actually come to contract terms with them? Will they actually meet the model that you're looking for? Okay, maybe one of them is going to say, you know what, you have to have everything shipped by noon. You have to have everything ready for us to pick up by noon, and that's just unacceptable to the expectation you want to set for your customers, right? So there's going to be some functionality questions that's going to help you narrow that down. But that being said, with the volatility in the markets, it's and the fact that we only have really 3 same-day carriers right now that will ship just about anything, you probably want to be contacting all 3 of those, okay? And it's one of those things because their coverage areas will probably change in the future. At least having a conversation starter means that when somebody says, we're going to pull the trigger on this, you'll have that ability to move faster. Of course, you also want to ensure you have carrier software, that multi-carrier software that will allow you to easily onboard those. All right, I think I covered that one pretty far.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. That was great. All right, the next question is, how will same-day delivery impact drop shipping?
Okay. So now drop shipping, that to me is that external inventory source that we're talking about. So you may not own that inventory, It may be something that you're going to buy. Maybe the cost of that good is going to be slightly higher, but of course, that ability to satisfy that expectation for the customer hits that loyal customer, so it makes sense. So whether, to me, any type of external inventory source should be able to execute from there as well. Now, that being said, if you are a drop shipper, meaning that you're a 3PL and you stock and fulfill for other companies, you need to ensure that if they're going to be communicating with you through EDI, that you actually have your fulfillment times set up so that you can deal with these same-day deliveries, that you have the carriers that we're talking about. You have to have these carriers are already set up as well. And, of course, you want to make sure, especially since most fulfillment houses are large warehouses, well, now, especially if you're going to be using crowdsourced, you got to be prepared for the fact that you may have 10 cars show up in your parking lot, all looking to pick up different parcels and deliver them for same-day delivery. So there's going to be a lot of growing pains as that starts to hit drop shippers as well. But I think if it's something that just a couple of quick thoughts, I've even heard people talking about a drive-up window, but just a little bit of thinking, and all of a sudden you can have some ideas as to how you as a drop shipper or 3PL fulfillment house can ensure that you're able to offer that feature, that functionality, that customer expectation execution from your facility.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, the next question is, can we negotiate same-day tariff rates with these carriers? And then can you incorporate into ProShip where it will choose the best carrier and price for a particular same-day shipment?
Yes. That is, I alluded to this a little bit further, but let me clearly state that even if you're not using ProShip, you should ensure that your software, like ProShip can rate shop across different carriers, service, and modes, and filter by a particular time in transit. So the example I gave a little bit earlier was one where we have an origin point which has two different shippers available to it. Let's say it's Deliv and FedEx. Okay. In this case, depending upon how far out that the destination is from that origin, maybe FedEx will be the more cost-effective solution. Maybe Deliv will be the more cost-effective solution. Your shipping software, like ProShip should be able to go ahead and do that rate shopping real time and respond without anybody waiting for it. So as soon as that order is pulled, that calculation should be done. The label should be ready for that warehouse operator or that store operator, or whomever it is that's actually going to be applying that label to the parcel. That should be done sub-second, real time, across as many same-day, express, grounds, you name it, carriers you want to offer. All right, man.
Great,
we got a
thank
lot of
you.
questions coming in here.
All right, the next one is, how are low-margin retailers able to leverage the high cost of these third-party companies like Deliv or Postmates, especially in this age of free shipping?
Here we go back to the customer's willingness to pay more for this because they see it as a value add. And if a customer feels that there's enough value, they're going to pay for it. And this is where we talked a little bit about how are you going to cost that to your customer. You may want to give them the same discount off of list that you would have done for whatever, I'll just call them more value added services that you might have had. Maybe it's ground, maybe it's one of the postal last mile solutions. So you're not asking them to pay the full price, but my expectation is that a lot of shippers out there are just going to show the exact price or the list price that would be given to them. Okay, some will probably provide, if they are able to negotiate a discount, which I haven't heard too much about discounts yet in the same day delivery area. If they're able to get a discount, some may even extend that discount to their high value customers, meaning those customers that have a great lifetime value. So it really comes down to a lot of those calculations that you made in the past. If any of you were around when credit cards started getting accepted everywhere, at first there was a fee on top of it, and then there was, and then it just got built into the cost of doing business. We expect all of shipping to be the same way, but the same day shipping to be the last value add to be built in eventually.
Okay, that makes sense. The next question we have for you today is, can you fully leverage ProShip if you are not the account holder for all carriers? Does it have to be integrated with WMS or OMS or both?
So I'm going to break this down because this is this is a compound question, if you will. Right? So we'll break this down as if it was an epic. And let's start with the OMS. The reason you would integrate your OMS to a product like ProShip is because you want to make a better informed decision as to where to source that goods, so that you can understand the total cost of the transaction and not just go for the lowest cost of goods sold origin point, right? So that's the first thing. It is very important that you use something like an OMS with a ProShip. Okay, and then integrated with your WMS. Well, that's really the execution point. So if we're talking about one of your own DCs, you can integrate it with your WMS software to ship from your WMS software, or you can integrate something like ProShip after your WMS software. So after everything has been packed up and you just have license plates or something like that, you can scan that and we can execute that and provide that final shipping label in there. If the WMS is actually located external to you, that's where EDI should come in, and you should be informing, in this case, your vendor, how you want to execute that shipment. Okay? And no, you don't have to be the account holder for all the carriers. You could be doing third-party billing here. Please note, if you are doing third-party billing, there was a question a little while ago about if we can compare two of them. With any software, unless you actually have those accounts in the software, you don't have access to the discounts, so you won't actually know those rates unless they're list rates. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's a little bit of limitations if you're a drop shipper, if you're a 3PL, but that should be familiar to you already about how you can use third-party billing versus not.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I think this is an interesting one. It says, how can you handle the uncertainty of store-level inventory positions for same-day deliveries? Like, for example, what happens if the store ran out of the item? Do you foresee higher cancellation rates, which might lead to more disappointed customers? What are your thoughts on this uncertainty that kind of goes along with, our industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I'm going to say one thing about that. Number one, I am not a retail expert. But however, having been involved in the shipping side of the execution pieces, we have heard some very interesting and what we find to be very useful ways to handle things like this. Number one, the ability for an order to time out at an origin is very important, right? So if you push an order out to a store and it's based upon whether it's a same day, a next day, or something that can get out tomorrow and still be fine, you want to have a different lifetime for that order to actually sit at that destination. Again, this starts to become part of the OMS, which is not what ProShip does, which is why I'm hedging a little bit here. But it's very interesting that how we've seen this be implemented, so that if it's a same-day situation, that may only have a lifetime of 30 minutes or an hour. Okay, whereas if it's a next day situation, it may have a lifetime of 2 hours or something of that nature before the OMS pulls it back and says, okay, this store is obviously too busy. Let's move it to the next store with an even higher priority. Okay, and a store that we're seeing that they're picking and packing right now. For your stores, what if they run out of an item? That's, again, that goes into inventory control, and there are things like safety stocks and things of that nature. Little beyond my pay grade here, a little beyond my area of expertise. So I'm going to say, talk to your point of sale vendors, talk to your your store inventory software vendors and talk to your order management software vendors. Some of those may all be one. If you're a Shopify cart, maybe you've got all that together, and maybe you want to get some extensions to Shopify to do something like that. If you're in Manhattan's Active Omni solution, those are all built in as one big huge suite. If you're, as we see a lot of retailers, if you're an SAP, IBM Sterling Commerce, and maybe a Manhattan in the warehouse, those softwares each have their own way of dealing with this, and they may or may not be in the store themselves. So it's one of those things where it's not really part and parcel of the carrier software, but it is part of that enterprise software stack. And as I mentioned before, we want to make sure we try to put functionality in the right part of the stack. And some of those functionalities that I talked about, that short lifetime, that redistribution, that looking to see if a store is actually executing to say, okay, this store has personnel that are free and available. There's lots of things out there in the market, and I've just touched on some of them just due to some experience helping some large retailers deploy. All right.
All right, thank you. Okay, so for our next question, it's regarding the United States Postal Service. Can you explain a little more what exactly an NSA agreement is?
All right. I can explain a little bit here. This is one of those things where, let's face it, the United States Post Office is a quasi-government component, right? They're what they're allowed to do is dictated by Congress. And one of the things that they don't like to do very frequently is give out custom discounts. Okay. Whereas it's very common for, as soon as you get above a couple hundred shipments a day, you call up your UPS rep, your FedEx rep, and you start negotiating on particular lanes, on particular service levels, so on and so forth. That's not very common with the United States Post Office. Usually you just qualify for commercial or commercial plus pricing, and that's it. If you are a large enough shipper, you can, at least size is the only thing I've seen so far for criteria. But size is at least one of the criteria pieces to qualify to negotiate with the United States Post Office for a national service agreement. Okay, so it's something that's very specific to the post office, and not something you see very commonly. So I don't know if with same day, if with the increased requests for using the United States Post Office's same day services, if that's going to start making those NSA agreements more popular, or what we actually expect to see is that might move into commercial plus range, so it's available to more people a lot easier. And of course, that leads me to my last piece here. With that change, with the way the carriers are changing these things, you need to make sure that your shipping software is updating itself on a routine basis. Our software updates once or twice a week to ensure that we're pulling the latest carrier business rules, fuel surcharges, and other things that affect day-to-day shipping. So with that, hopefully I've answered that question for you. Amanda, let me throw it over to you for the close.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Justin. We really appreciate you taking the time, to be here with us today and present this. I think you went through some really fantastic information and examples. So I just want to remind everyone that this presentation is available for the next 12 months, so you can access it at any time just using that same link. Thank you for attending today. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this afternoon. And a huge thanks to ProShip for sponsoring, and to Justin for being here with us today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.